Yo, hey, what up, family? This is Doug Reed, better known as A.D. Reed of the Let's Go Show. Hey, I'm excited today. I have Reginald Howard. Now, I work with Reginald Howard with the Black Men Heal. He's the senior program coordinator. But real talk, Reggie is my nephew, man. Like, Reg's my nephew. And of course, Reggie is my encourager. He's my motivator. He's the one that's got me started. This is our uh, first podcast. So, yo, Reg, how you doing?
I'm feeling good, man. I'm happy to see you finally did it. I know you've been talking about like getting the message out there and finding your platform to do it. I'm so happy to see the Let's Go show turn in from a comment on people pages to a platform.
Yeah, most definitely, man, and I thank you for that because now I understand that our voice matters, But one thing I kind of want to, and I get this from you. I want to dig in the crates with Reggie Howard, So who is Reggie Howard?
Ooh, that's a great question. And I'm actually reading a book right now called Dark Horse that's helping me understand. And I was looking for it because of what oh yeah, it's right here. It's a good book called The Dark Horse, man, and it's talking about achieving success through the pursuit of fulfillment, and it's actually allowing you to understand you and what makes you tick. So it talks about like your micro motives and like the things that motivate you. You know, again, we on the Let's Go show. So what are the things that motivate you? And sometimes we think it's external things that opportunities. It's the podcast, it's the Black Man Hill. But D Reed been saying let's go from a different narrative. We can go back to when you like you said you was using it. And so when you go with let's go, it's like, all right, let's go is gonna go into different many forms, but it comes from something inside of you. So for me, when going back to answering your question, I just try to be a voice for the voiceless. I think one of my, if to sum up that question into one simple answer is a communicator. I like listening, I like understanding, and then using my gifts and talents in whatever medium to speak and voice that understanding. So sometimes people can't. I think I listened to something a long time ago and say sometimes words get in the way of how we feel. And
Ooh.
so you can't express sometimes how you feel because you don't have the right words to say it. And so my greatest asset is that I have the ability to understand, and I'm on a search to find as many words so that way I can communicate certain thoughts.
Yeah, see, the people don't even know, Reg, and this is why I love you so much. Like, you're going to be dropping gems, so y'all have to take note of the gems that Reggie's going to drop. So we're going to dig a little deeper. Tell us where you from, and the little Reggie
Oh,
up until now.
I'm a first generation American, and the reason why I start to wear that a little bit more often because I didn't recognize the significance in that. For me, growing up as a first generation American, I've learned the significance of being I don't want to say an advocate, was a role model for people in a third world country that they look at this as a like you look at yourself as I'm still struggling to make it in coming out of certain communities where they may look at it as you're like the standard of certain things, and I'm doing more job to connect with my community. So my mom was born out of a country called Antigua. It's a country, Antigua and Barbuda. It's a beautiful country that has 365 beaches. So if you ever want to find a destination spot, they tagline is always having a beach for every day of the year. So first generation American, grew up in Philadelphia, like the Allen Logan section to be exact, for anybody's familiar with Philadelphia. And I was always, and this will get into the term what we say D Read about. I'm from the sidewalks where I had friends in the streets. A lot of my friends that I grew up with are either in jail or dead, but I knew how to be safe to stay out the streets. Like I was on the sidewalks, and you can still get in trouble on the sidewalks, which I did. Like I was getting in trouble, and I had no business doing it because I would like to say that I was the smart kid that never tapped into his talents because of his community. And so because you see, I just pulled out a book out of nowhere, but I didn't have that ability because of the community that we grew up in or the environment. They nobody want to hear about the dark horse. Nobody want to hear about what you just read about. Nobody want to hear about that. They know what's going on in our environment. And I don't fault them for it either because when you coming from such a stressful environment, that you don't got time to focus on some of those things. So growing up on the sidewalks, going to high school and college dropout. Became a father at a young age, married my I guess college sweetheart, been together for 11 years, and a father of 2 kids. So that's the little story in a nutshell of who is Reggie Howard.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And, similar, same thing with me. In my high school, I got a young child on the way, and not really knowing how to handle that responsibility. Even with that, like you said, being a young couple, having a child on the way, how did that feel?
Actually, and I know this is where we connect that from the mental health side. That's where my first suicide attempt came in, because the pressures of being a young father, not having my father for guidance, that protection, that safety, security, it caused me to have a lot of anxiety. Again, all these words that we using now, that's the vocabulary we're learning from being mental health advocates and being in the field. But at that time, I just knew I wasn't okay. Like, I just knew I felt a certain type of way. I felt the pressure, unknown pressure. Again, now it's anxiety, but before it was just a pressure buildup. And so that caused me to text a few of my friends, like, take care of my sons. I don't want to be here anymore, or my one son at the time. Unfortunately, that allowed for someone to come and get me off the bridge. Two of my closest friends to this day, um, they came and got me off the bridge, but that still didn't stop that pressure. You know what I mean? Like, I still had that pressure on my end. I still had responsibilities to handle. And still to this day, I probably still feel that pressure. But I just have a better way of managing it, and learning what therapists call coping skills, and different techniques to manage that type of pressure on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you already know. Thank you for actually sharing that. And I know I've heard you talk about in the past, and because that actually your experience and some of that led to a book, right?
Yeah, nah, and it's so true. And so I wanted to. DJ Khaled has an album way back in the day from like 2009, and it was called "Suffering from Success." And he was talking about the woes and cries of like being successful, but no one understands that you can't complain. You got all this money, you can't complain. How you gonna complain? You got to go to this state and that state and do all it. Look, me and you went on a tour, and we was like, we burnt out. So imagine somebody like a Jay-Z or somebody that's out there that got to move on a day-to-day basis, and how that weighs on them. But nobody wants to hear that. So the title came from that, where my book is called "Suffering into Success: A Paradigm Shift of Struggle to Achieve Happiness." And the reason why I wrote that book is because I started to, well, in 2018, it was one of my most successful years, where I started my podcast. I wrote a book, which is the book we're talking about now. And then I started speaking and going into communities, talking about having conversations around personal development. And I started to realize that success had a price you had to pay to get into it. And all of our struggles and all of the things that we pay, you talk to me all the time about you got to take account for the details. And when I started to take account for the details, I realized that none of us get out of this alive where we don't get unscathed, and we had the perfect life and everything went the right way and we did everything we supposed to do. There's a barrier to entry. And if we embrace that barrier to entry, then we probably would be a lot more happier. So the example I give is when you go to the gym, literally, if you look at the science of your muscles, you have to tear your muscles apart and then they come back stronger. That's literally that. The other example I give, which I don't say too often because I'm not a woman, but literally how we all got into this world. A mother goes through back pain, restless nights, stretch marks, overeating because they're feeding the baby and feeding themselves, all of these different things, but they know at the end of it, the reward of that beautiful baby is worth it. At the end of tearing your muscle apart, the reward of that beautiful body. And then the one concept that sparked it all off was how a diamond is formed and how a precious diamond is made. These people are dying in these diamond mines to get these diamonds. And then when that piece of rock is started off as a black piece of coal, they have to burn, chisel, and do all of this stuff for that diamond to come. It's a price to entry. And so I wanted to collect, I started to realize my experiences and things that I was going through studying thought leaders and personal and professional development leaders out there, and saying, like, you know what? Everybody has some type of story. How can we embrace our stories and achieve happiness? So it's a paradigm shift of like, all right, let me stop thinking like my life is so hard, which we all do have our struggles, but utilizing those struggles to benefit yourself and other people.
Yeah, that's pretty strong, Reg. I mean, I told you, and I tell you already, Reg is a philosopher. He's just one of those wise men. But let me ask you a question though. And I know, even me going through Black Men Heal and how it started, but there's a level of courage that you got to have, you know, one to say that you need therapy or admit that you need therapy. And then even to talk about some of the traumas or things that happen in your life. How long was that process? Just like you talk real fluently about your book and, you know, the suicide attempts like flawlessly. But how did it get you to that? What did it take to get to that point that you could talk about it openly? Because you know me, I express my emotions, you know, but was there a process with that you were comfortable in being on any platform and sharing that? Because it takes a lot to share that. You know what I say? Like everybody can tell a story, but everybody can't share a story. And you just shared a very powerful story.
No, and that's a great question. I don't think nobody has asked me that, so you're doing a great job over here, sir. But um, it's always this one moment that I refer to when I think about my journey and of sharing my story and where I got to. And it was this individual when I first started speaking, and I was speaking at like Rotary clubs. That's why I told you I used to speak at Rotary clubs to like just to practice and get myself in front of an audience. And a guy came after me because Rotary clubs is usually a fairly more Caucasian network. And it was a black guy. I think he was either a dishwasher, servant, or something like that. And he came up to me. This was around like 2018, 19, and he was like, "Man, the way you commanded this room in front of these all these professionals, quote unquote, if anybody's just listening, they can't see." Um, and he was almost at admiration where it expanded his thought of himself. And then we spoke on me being a first generation American, why I wear that with pride, and I never used to because I didn't recognize the significance. So when you talk about when I'm sharing my story and how I realized that I had to share my story not only for me but for other people, like it was so other people feel encouraged to like to know that they're not alone and that they aren't forgotten about in their story, and them feeling like, you know what, I can share mine too. Like if he's brave enough to do it, then I'm brave enough to do it too. And it's being someone of I'll use this quote again. I used it before: a walking billboard of mental health. Where if I share my story, then I'm encouraging someone else to share their story, and then we can all feel comfortable. And I tell the kids when I go into the schools all the time, you shouldn't feel alone in a room full of people. And the only reason why we feel alone in a room full of people is because we are all trying to hide our experiences, our stories. Oh, you see me? Oh no. Oh, I can't. You can't. You can't know who I really am, because if you know who I really am, then I will feel too vulnerable in this space. And so, to answer your question, I know I took a long way to go around it, but it's the learning how it impacted others to in empowered others. There was a better word. I learned how it empowered others to share their story, and so it took a few years. But once that guy showed that, I'm always looking for that guy in the room. Even where we just did an event in New York, and he came up to me, man, we talked for like 20 minutes because he saw himself in me, and that was all I needed right there.
Yeah, that's powerful, bro. I mean, this is what it's all about. The Let's Go show. I mean, those are the things that motivated you, and I appreciate you for sharing it. You know, we talk about the book, and you slightly mentioned just a little bit, and we're going to talk about what you're doing right now. Tell us more about the your podcast. You know, tell us more about like how many episodes and downloads do you have?
Nah, and it actually goes right back to your last question of what you asked about what how did like how did I get comfortable in sharing my story? It started off from the podcast. The podcast was in 2018. I started a podcast because I started to get, I want to say, the mental health moment of being awoken. And I feel like we all to some capacity have a mental health moment. Was it was at that point you started looking at stuff differently. And I was sharing my story so much, but then I realized that um I don't have everyone's experiences. And so I can't speak from the LGBTQIA perspective. I can't speak from a woman's perspective. I can't speak from different cultures' perspective. So I wanted to um, share those therapeutic stories so that way someone feel encouraged. I wanted to have that same passion that makes me share my story, have other elements of that come from different individuals, because I can't have that voice, and it speaks from a different relatability. And so my podcast is called the Black Mental Health Podcast. You can Google it wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm sure wherever you listening to the Let's Go show, you can find the Black Mental Health Podcast. So please look at in the search bar, leave a review. That it helps out a lot. So sharing therapeutic stories. We're at episode 112. And we are on pace at this current timing of the audio to reach 100,000 downloads. And it's really exciting because I think I say it a lot. Podcasts don't make it past certain episodes. I think the average is like 10 episodes before people would be like, it's not making me no money. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. I had a different outlook on my podcast. And this probably the first time I even shared this with you. For one, is legacy. Think about if you could hear your grandfather talk, or your your dad talk, or your great uncle, or whatever the case may be, and what you could have learned and gave. My grandmother that's from Antigua, I would have loved to listen back to some of her episodes because her voice still is existing, and so now I still can get something out of it. So it's a legacy play for the long term. So even if nobody paid me to do it, I'm just doing this for my children's children and my kids, for when I'm long gone or whatever the case may be. They'll have something that has my experience in it for the long term. The second part of it is I just love having these conversations with people. Like I will have me and D talk all the time, regardless. This is the Let's Go show is just him capturing what he does is on a daily basis. And so this is like one of the perfect, again, I'll go off on a tangent a little bit. It's so many people that praise D Reed because they were like, yo, you call me and you check in on me, you motivate me, you empower me. And so him capturing in the podcast is you just getting a bite-sized bit of what he does all day. So for me, with my Black Mental Health Podcast, I have these type of conversations probably daily. I watch interviews. I have these conversations all the time, and I just love it. So those two things, nobody got to pay me to do. Legacy, free. And the last part of it is I realized, just like me sharing my story, in the room as a speaker, I realized these conversations are helping and healing people in a way that I never expected, because they are vulnerable enough to listen to it in a way that they probably won't, feel comfortable. Again, a podcast is in your ears. Nobody got to know that you're watching anything. You could just be doing dishes, listening in a car, whatever, where nobody got to know. So those are the three reasons why that podcast exists and why I continue to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And once again, I go back. Now we're talking about shared experiences. One of the things, same thing with the college, dropped out of college, end up going in the military, but I don't have a college degree. So what I've learned in this space, even, this mental health advocacy and everything that I do, it's about those lived experiences. Like me and you talk about it all the time. Like we walk in this walk. We're not just talking. I mean, now of course we're doing a podcast. Now we're talking, but we're serious about this. It's about history. Even the fact that you just a couple things. You just pulled out that book, and I talk about it all the time. It's not that we have to be educated. We have to be re-educated. So we got to go back in the crates, go back and pull those things out. Same thing that you're doing. One of the biggest things you just hit me with, legacy. And I even know on my social media posts or wherever I'm at, you'll put legendary. And that makes a big difference, because now, and I'm going back because now, I retired out of the government, and you can get, when you retire out of the government, the president of the United States can sign the letter congratulating you on your, 20 years, 30 years you did. Of course, it's not, well, I'm going to take that back because I'm going to flip it, because I am going to frame it. But my letter was signed by President Obama.
Digging in the crates right now.
Legendary.
Legendary.
So I get that. And even with this path that we're both on, this is what we're realizing, that our voice matters. And we're not just out here talking, because you already said it. There's ears to hear. I get it from a spiritual standpoint. No eyes have seen, no ear has heard what we can do for God that loves the people that love God. And this is what we're talking about. This is what the conversations about the Let's Go show. This is what we're talking about. But let me ask you more. We're going to talk about this future. I mean, we got the podcast going, families going, and 1,000 other things Matter of fact, tell us about your schooling, man, because I know you made a decision to go back. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, man, and it's actually certain things of what you just said. You spoke of earlier about like how the lived experience and how much they matter, right, and how much they contribute to people listening to you and wanting to understand where you're coming from. And so you being from the military, you having that work in the prison system, you having those certain things, I'm butting into my career, right? And so all those things have some solidification in them. Those are industries that are have been around for years. And I realized that although I have lived experience, there are certain industries that won't even allow me in the door because I don't have certain credentials. And I can talk to certain people on a certain level, and I will always hit a wall because I don't have certain credentials in these spaces. Even just you being a veteran, you automatically get to do certain things because you're a vet. And so as I'm shaping my career, I realized that I still had enough time to go back to school and finish what I started. And again, this is language that I just got later on in life where I realized that it wasn't that I didn't like school. And again, I just said from a kid, I always felt like read and I'll read. You ain't got to pay me to read. The environments that we come from didn't teach me how to be a student. And that's two different things. You can gain knowledge, again, lived experience, but to be a student was a whole different thing. So I've been in school now and I was like, all right. And again, in school, you learn about a bunch of things you don't care about anyway. So that was the other part of that. So this time I flipped it around. Now I'm learning about my lived experience, if that makes sense. So I'm in school now. Again, I've been studying this mental health field for over 4 years now, 4 to 5 years since 2018, 17 rather. And I was like, all right, I thought I meant becoming a therapist. Let me go to school and become a therapist, which is still an option right now, but that's another story. And they said it was a major called Health Service Administration, where you can have a health component and you can learn the business component. And I was like, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then I'm in this mental health field. This gets a chance to combine the two fields together and learn how to run health organizations and things of that nature. So I wanted to go back to school to answer your question, to solidify what I was already doing in the community and kind of open the doors of academia and other spaces to kind of utilize the lived experience in an academic way.
You know what? And that's so powerful you said that, because honestly, if I would have, I mean, even being in the military, because the military give you options to continue your schooling, even when you get out. I chose a different path. I cashed in the money. And I'll be honest, I just cashed in the money. And there's so much more I could achieve and doors I could have walked through if I had that education. I'm blessed enough to be, like retired and things that I'm doing, but that's what gives me the power and the incentive to kind of motivate you. Like, Reggie, do that. Go ahead and do that thing. You know what I mean? Go ahead and get your education, and we're looking forward to it because we know the disparity that's going on in the health administration as far as what's going on in that field. There's so much disparities, and people don't. You see the frontline workers. You see the assistants, you see that, but now we talk about the managers. We talking about people that are making decisions, the ones that are at the table making decisions, and we need you there, and you'll be there. And I'm just gonna be sitting in the back room talking about, "Let's go, baby." But you know what, Reg? I mean, this is a pleasure to actually do this, and if just going forward, what are your plans going forward to this point? We talk about King's Corner. If you can share, like, what do you see for King's Corner? What do you see for Black Men Heal? And then, of course, what do you see for Reggie Howard?
It's a great question, and I think they all tie in one another. So for King's Corner, I think is going to continue to expand into different cities, different nationwide. It will be like something that people look forward to, almost like Made in America, Coachella, all these big events is something that people will look forward to every year in attending with King's Corner. I don't know how much you told your audience about King's Corner yet, but yes, that with King's Corner, Black Men Hill, I feel Black Men Hill will be a staple almost, and I compare it in my eyes to like a NAMI or a what are the other organizations that slip in my mind right now, or the Department of Behavioral Health Services and Disabilities here in Philadelphia. but a global, a nationwide resource of mental health, with psychoeducation, breaking down the stigma in regards to mental health. And last but not least, for myself, um, I have come to the conclusion for me, and go back to your last question and the overall conversation about how all of those play into one another. Is having a global impact is my next goal of what I'm working on. I think through Black Men Hill, through the podcast, through whatever endeavors that I sign myself up for, is to have a global impact. Because again, going all the way back to your first question of like, who am I feel like, again, understanding and my ability to communicate. And so now, me being in school and getting this degree, now I can walk into a global United Nations and have a certain conversation. Now they will allow me into that space, and I can't be just like I'm Reg that doesn't have anything. I just want to say something. It's like, no, this the PhD or the master or whatever is walking into this space. So for myself, I'm looking to have global conversations around the disparities of, like you said, or the barriers, and trying to find real solutions for these barriers and conversation. Global impact. That's, if we wanted to sum that whole thing up, global impact was what's next for me.
Yeah, and you know what? And I'm glad you said it because one thing, even in regards to Black Men Hill King's Corner, just to explain to the audience, like me and Reggie actually work together with Black Men Hill. I am the senior, I am the director of partnerships. Reggie is the senior program coordinator. Black Men Hill gives free therapy to Black men in 8 different states. Uh, After the death of George Floyd, with a tremendous amount of applicants wanting to apply for therapy, the team got together and said, what could we do? We came up with a virtual free space called King's Corner. King's Corner's been rocking for 2.5, close to 3 years. Uh, and we understood that impact. So we made a decision to go out on tour. This year we went out on tour with the Black Men Need Hugs tour. And it was, as a people, it was tremendous being able to go in that space and explain to the people what we're doing, giving a brother a hug, talking about different things as far as what's generational. Even to talk about our sons. Reg had a very vulnerable moment, in Baltimore. I recall that distinctly because I remember, honestly, for me, just praying as you were talking, um, with your son and not saying, not being able to, hug your dad, but then coming to a reality that you're there for your own son. So I thank you for that, man. I thank you for that reminder, and I thank you for sharing, because you do have a vision, and you're part of the vision. You're a part of our future. What I realize, we are history,
Mm.
and that's the thing that I believe truly, because we're writing the next book. Rich has the book, but we're writing the next book on our history. So I appreciate you sharing that. So I want to kind of switch gears, because I want to throw a couple words out to you, and you just tell me. Uh, and I have my piece of paper, but you just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Um, we'll start with family,
Everything.
impact,
Legacy.
entrepreneurship,
Blood. Like, that's my lifeblood.
goals,
History.
King's Corner,
Healing.
vision.
Necessary.
My brother, Reggie Howard, senior senior program coordinator for Black Men Heal, orator, owner of the Black Mental podcast. I thank you, sir. I thank you for coming on this page. And this is why we do the Let's Go show. Any other words, Reg? We like to close out King's Corner, and I want to be able to dig into your nuggets, dig into your crates.
Mm-hmm.
Any last words, sir?
I'm gonna read something that I just wrote out of this, or I just copied out of this book today, because I think I think it's needed, especially when we talk about Let's Go and we talk about relationships. Um, it said, you know how many truly talented people in all disciplines never got to the top because their relationships aren't good. Part of winning is people wanting to see you win. And I want to give my brother D Reed his flowers because he is one of those people that want to see people win. And people are talented, they're good, but if you ain't got people cheering you on, it's almost hard to get past certain things. So align, pay attention to your relationships, and make sure that you are utilizing them and feeding them and nourishing them in a way that could be properly grown, because at the end of the day, that's all we got is the people who will love us and the way that they love us, and that's all I got.
Once again, brother, I appreciate you. Now, how can the audience find you on social media, or what is the best way to actually either contact you, or how can they follow you?
I've learned the easiest way. You can put it in Google. I'm Googleable. So put it in Google, the Black Mental Health Podcast, or put in my name, Reginald A. Howard. Put the middle initial that separate, because it was a Reggie Howard football player back in the day. But Reginald A. Howard on Google. You'll find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and all of those different places. And please go subscribe to the Black Mental Health Podcast on Apple. They really got big with them reviews and things of that nature. Tell them, make sure you leave a review and tell me you heard me on the Let's Go show, so I know where you came from.
Yes, sir. Hey, listen, the audience, this has been the Let's Go show with Doug Reed. One thing I will say, let's go, baby. Peace. I'm out.